Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. We are going to continue our conversation into software. So basically in the previous video I had discussed that software is created by developers through IDEs and different programming languages. So we are going to talk about how websites are structured, and that would be through HTML. So this is going to be your introduction into HTML. So let's go ahead and jump in. So basically, HTML is the language that is going to structure whatever you view online. So that would be the websites you use daily. So what exactly is it? HTML actually stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So let's take notice of markup language. Being that it says markup, that means it is not technically a programming language. However, some people do put it in the category of a programming language because you have to code and you have to know the structure of it to build something. So some people may consider it a programming language, but it is technically a markup language. So it basically is used to structure a web page. So what you see on a website is written in HTML. So it doesn't really do things, but it describes things. So it's describing how that website page would look. So overall, in each HTML page, there's going to be various components, which you see here, which would be a document declaration, tags, and it will have various tags, pretty much a lot of tags throughout it. And then there are two main sections that you will have, a head and a body, similar to a human body. Now I will explain each one a little bit more in depth. So your document declaration, this is very important when it comes to a HTML file. So the document declaration is pretty much what's telling your computer, hey, this is going to be an HTML file. So if you forget this declaration, then the HTML will not know, the page will not know that is HTML following it. So it could cause errors on your end. So you always want to make sure when you are creating an HTML file that the document declaration is at the very first line, just to be sure that there are no issues later. So I just want to point out that this is technically not considered a HTML tag, and you'll understand that in a little bit, but it's more so of an instruction. So it's just telling the browser that the page is using HTML. So your first keyword here is declaration. Declaration is your first keyword. All right, now let's get into the tags. So tags are what you would consider your instructions, and they're responsible for pretty much the structure of the actual HTML file. So how is it going to be laid out? And the most important thing you need to notice is the area in blue, the opening and the closing tag. So every tag you use to create a structure has to have an opening and a closing tag. Now, where it says tag name, that would be whatever the name of the tag is, which we will cover a little bit later. But the most important part and the difference between the open and the closed tag is the slash. So make sure on the closing tag that you always have a slash there, because if you don't, then it will cause errors. So just make sure that is included. But pretty much when you use a tag, all contents that you want in that structure for that specific tag have to go in between the opening and the closing. So you'll see that in a few. So I just want you to think of it like this. Think of a sandwich. A sandwich has two slices of bread. And those two slices of bread in our case would be our tags. Now everything you want inside of your sandwich would be the filling, and that would be the content. So basically, your tags are the bread, and then everything you need inside of that bread or the tags needs to go in between it. So here's an example of a tag example. As you see here, we have a tag that is labeled with P inside. So P actually stands for paragraph in this case, which again, we will learn a few tags later on. But in this case, what you see here is saying create a paragraph that says hello world. And you see the opening and the closing tag. So this is how you would create tags within HTML. And you'll see a little bit more later on. So here are some tags you can use. The next few slides are going to be pretty much tag information. And of course, as you see, it is a lot of information. So I will allow you to pause and read it for yourself instead of, making this video a lot longer than it needs to be. But these are going to be 4 of your primary tags that are going to be in every single HTML file you are going to create. So these would be ones that you definitely want to memorize. So HTML, which is basically saying it's the HTML document. This is going to be different from that declaration tag. This actually would typically come after the declaration tag. Head, which is basically metadata, so it's just like information, but it's not actually going to be seen on the page. Your title would be how your website page is shown in a web browser as far as the web browser tab that you open. And the body is actually where everything else will go. So the body is technically one of the most important tags you will have. So continuing on, just walking through each one briefly. The one with H1, H2, etc., those are going to be headings. So like if you have a heading of text, the basic big bolded text, that would be what it is. So it goes from largest to smallest. So example, H1 would be the biggest bolded text you can have, and H6 would be the smallest version of a header you can have. Then you have your P. So P is paragraphs. That is actually used a lot. So that is one, of course, that you would want to memorize. Actually, all of these are pretty much important to memorize if you're looking to be in website building, because you would use these a lot throughout your page. So P is for paragraph. A is for your hyperlinks. So this is how you would connect your various HTML pages together and or display another website inside of your website. And IMG stands for images if you want to embed images, which of course in a website you would be doing. So all of these headers all of these tags are very important as well. So here, these tags aren't necessarily that important, but they're important when it comes to formatting. So you see here I have the A again because there will be hyperlinks used in your website. So that's important just to remember that. The other ones, UL, OL, and LI, are really for lists. So that's if you are creating a list and you want it to display information like a bulleted list or a numbered list. So UL and OL are used to actually create the overall structure of the list, and between those you would put the LI, which would be the list item. So LI would go in after UL or after OL to basically make the list that you're creating. So to give you an idea, LI is actually each bulleted list or each numbered item. So for example, if you wanted to make a list of groceries, each grocery item would be LI, 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 etc. And the same would be if you wanted to do steps of instructions. Each instruction would be listed as a LI, 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 with a opening and a closing tag on the LI, of course. And that would go in between the UL and the OL. So going on a little bit more, this page of tags is more so for your construction of how you want your actual page to look. So div is a very important one. It actually puts a container around everything. So it's kind of like a grouping. So let's say you wanted to format a bunch of paragraphs or hyperlinks or bulleted lists together. If you put it in a div or a div container, it will basically allow you to format it as a group instead of you having to go format each one individually. Span is kind of similar to that, but it's more so for text. So if you wanted to put it around a certain amount of text, BR, that's one that is used a lot. That's like adding spacing throughout your web page. It's like hitting enter. Like if you were to do that in a Word document, hitting enter, that's kind of the idea of what a BR is or what it does. It's just adding spacing. And strong is used to like bold text if you want to bold it. However, you could always use, your headers to do that as well. So here we have a quick example of a HTML document. So technically, if you were to type this out in a notepad or on your computer, then this would actually load in your web browser if you were to double click on it after you save that text file. So as you see here, we have our declaration at the very top, followed by the HTML tag. If you look at the very bottom of that HTML code that we're looking at, you see the closing tag of HTML is at the very bottom, which means everything in the HTML code has to go in between the HTML opening and closing tag. Now, the most important part you need to notice is the body. So that is going to be the one that's going to show up on your actual screen. The title will show up in the actual tab, but the body is where the contents of that actual HTML is going to be. So that's where you would put lists, that's where you would put tables, etc. to format and structure your overall website page. So now that we've covered that, I just wanted to state the second keyword is tag. So tag is another keyword. So moving on, we're going to get a little bit deeper into the specifics of tags. So the image tag is one that, of course, you would want to use because I don't think anyone's went to a web page that has no images. So this would be one you're going to use. So I want to point out when you're creating an HTML file that the image that you want to use has to be in the same exact folder location as the HTML file that you are created. So for example, if you created the HTML file and saved it into your documents folder, you also need to save the image you want to use in that file within the documents folder so that your computer knows where to find it. If you don't have them in the same location. So for example, if you have your HTML file in your documents, but the image itself is in the downloads, it will have errors and it will not show. So always make sure when you do that, that you place it in the same folder. So this is how you would do a image. The screenshot of code right there is how you would do the image. So you see image is IMG followed by SRC, which stands for source, equals, and then in quotes, you would put the name of the image as it maps on your computer. So it needs to be the exact same thing you have it named in your computer for it to show. Now, alt is basically giving you a way to label your picture for accessibility purposes in case there is an issue with how it appears on your screen. And width, of course, would be the width of the picture itself. So you could, of course, put height here as well, but this is a quick example. And I understand you're probably like, I don't necessarily know what all of this means, so don't worry. There will be a video to go over actually creating an HTML file, but this is just introducing you to the basics before we do that. So, attributes. Attributes are actually used within a HTML tag, so that just gives information to a specific tag you are using, or it could actually modify how the tag appears on the web page. So attributes would go inside of the opening tag. So for example, in this screenshot, this is just showing you some syntax of what it would look like. And syntax basically means overall structure of what it would look like. So you have tag name, so whatever the tag you're using is, and follow it by attributes and the value for that attribute. So each tag is going to have its own attributes. So you would have to, deep dive into that. But that is kind of how an attribute looks. So if you go back here, if you notice in this example, IMG or the image tag has various attributes, and those attributes are source, alt, and width, while the values are cat.jpg, a sleepy cat, and 300. So that would be the difference. So again, just breaking it down in syntax form, basically the attributes are going to be the tag properties, so what you can use with the tag to modify it and or tell the HTML what to do with it, and the value will be whatever the tag property or the attribute needs. So again, here's the same example just written out for you to kind of understand. So the source is the image file location. Again, in this case, we put cat.jpg. That's assuming that the cat.jpg is in the same folder as the original HTML file. If it is not, then for source, you would put the actual file path. So where is it located? So for example, if you kept it in the downloads folder, you would need to do a path that says downloads / cat.jpg, etc. So source really can stand for the image file location, but if you keep it in the same folder, it's very much easy, and it's just basically what the image is called. Alt is, again, the description, and width is the display size, as we already mentioned. So here are some attributes that you can use. The most important column you want to focus on is the middle column, because that will let you know the actual tag that can use that attribute. So the first one, href, is what is used with A. Source, we saw an example of that. It can also be used with a script. And alt is used with image. Typically, title is used with most tags. So again, you can pause and read this through fully if you would like, so I don't make this video very long. We have ID and class, which you can use for most tags. And they are used for two different things, of course. So one's an identifier for like scripting, if you're looking to add in JavaScript to have some sort of action. And class is for grouping elements of CSS or JavaScript together. Those are two separate things that come into play with HTML, which we'll talk about a little later on. You also have a type attribute and a value attribute, which you can see which tags they go with, both input and your button. So again, there are more tags and attributes than I covered, but these are just the common ones that I would say are important for you to know, and or the important ones that you would use when creating a web page. So when you create a website, it doesn't always space out or look very good. Sometimes when you build out each structure, they will be on top of each other, so it doesn't look like there's any spacing. So all of these tags you see here will provide you the ability to add some sort of spacing to your actual web page. So for you all, this table is giving you all of the information, but the actual examples of how they will be conducted are on the last column. And it's basically various ways you can add spacing in your document. So you will see that in the HTML tutorial video. But for right now, this is just information that you can come back and look on to see about how to add spacing between the elements in your HTML document. All right, so let's get into another component that you can add to your HTML file. So that would be a form. So when I'm saying form, think of it exactly as what it is. Either it's used for surveys, signups, but it's basically to collect some information from a user that is using your website. So for example, if you want to create a sign-in page, this is what it would look like. And if you take a look at the screenshot, you see that there's the form tag at the very first line, followed by its attributes and the values for it. And inside there's a label that says name, and then it says there's a tag for input that is asking for text, basically whatever the user is going to enter for their username, and then there's a button to submit that information within a form. So forms are typically used in websites if you need to collect information from the user. Now, with the forms, there's various types of input types that a user could enter. So, for example, text, emails, passwords, checkbox. So, the checkbox would be like, check all that apply. Radio, which is actually like the view of a multiple choice box where you can have, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's the circles. And when you click on it, it's a dot in the center. That would be an example of radio. And submit, of course, would be your submit button to send the data to wherever you need it to go. Along with forms, you can create tables. So to create tables, tables is literally exactly how it would appear in like an Excel file or in a Word document, your typical table, and you would use the table tag to create that. So for tables, when you need to create a row inside of the table tag, it would be TR, and TH is to create the headers of the table, and TD is actually the table information. So we can see that here in this example of a table. This would be an example structure of how it would look at HTML. So you see here that in table rows, there is 2 table row tags. So TR1 at the top, TR2 at the bottom. And within that, there are 2 different headers, or in the first one, there's 2 headers. So basically, that very first TR opening section you see is basically creating the headers of your table that will hold course and time. And then if you look at the second section of TRs, you see that there is the actual data. So this wouldn't be bolded. This would be your regular text, and this basically would be CS 101, which would be under that table header of course, and 10 a.m. under that table header of time. So basically, it's 2 rows that are laying on top of each other. The first TR is the first row, and the second TR is the second row. So that's kind of how it will be built out in HTML in order. So you just have to build everything out separately to create it within a table tag. So to create a full website, you would need the following. And these 3 are going to be keywords as well. So each 3 of them would be keywords. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all keywords. So for you to create a full website, you would have to use all of these different languages to do that. So basically, right now we're getting the intro into HTML, which is the structure. But the other ones we will mention briefly a little bit later on. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So just for it to make sense for right now, think of your HTML as the skeleton of the body. CSS is going to be the skin. So how does that actual person look? The skin and their features. And then JavaScript is the muscles. So as you know, a human uses their muscles every time they move. So every time an action is done, a muscle is used. So think of JavaScript as being the action inside of the human when they move their arms or they move their legs. So basically, what have we covered today? Overall, we covered the basics of HTML. So just how do you create a web page or the websites that you are viewing? Now, obviously, the content we covered was very vague. It was just introducing you to the concept and what it looks like. Now, when you create a website, it will not be as simple as it looks. And from the screenshots, you can see it can be a little complex and complicated as far as how the structure works and, how the overall view would look. But just to keep you curious, I didn't really include a full example of a website thoroughly, but we will do a HTML tutorial to show you how to build out a website or a web page. So hopefully you learned something new, and I look forward to seeing you all in the HTML tutorial video.